Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're doing something a little different, but honestly, it's super practical. We're going to distill some seriously powerful, universal lessons on building a balanced life. And how are we doing it? By looking at the meticulously tracked micrometrics of one person's weekly review. We're looking at a literal snapshot in time, Eng's Week 20 of 2026. Now, this isn't just your standard diary. It's an incredibly structured analysis of health, hobbies, and intellectual pursuits. So let's just dive right in. We're kicking things off with Eng's central thesis. A proactive focus on health and wellness is crucial for a better life. Right out of the gate, this establishes that prioritizing your physical well-being isn't just some optional side quest. It is the absolute, essential foundation for hitting any personal or professional goal you might have. It boosts your daily energy, builds that long-term resilience against illness, and really just sets the stage for every single thing we want to accomplish. To unpack this fascinating routine, we're going to follow Eng's exact analytical structure. We'll be covering building the health foundation, diet and daily mindfulness, navigating coding and AI, programming language ecosystems, and finally, cultivating hobbies and home. Let's jump straight into Section 1, building the health foundation, sleep and physical resilience. 6.1 hours. Ouch, right? This pretty stark number represents Eng's moving daily average for sleep during this specific week. Obviously, that's a drop from the ideal 7 or 8 hours we all aim for. But honestly, it brilliantly highlights that constant, everyday friction between our ideal health goals and the actual reality of living a busy life. Breaking this down a bit further, the data shows Eng had 14 fragmented sleep sessions over just 7 days. That lack of REM, that deep restorative sleep, it severely impacts both cognitive function and physical recovery. And that was especially crucial here because Eng actually noted they were fighting off an illness. So what's the fix? The crucial point is the solution Eng proposes, picking a realistic wake-up time and sticking to it like glue. Doing that resets your disrupted circadian rhythm. It's just a fantastic, proactive, data-driven response to a physical setback. And having that proactive mindset is absolutely crucial for keeping your momentum going. Look at this. Despite the sickness, some relapsed knee pain that actually needed heat pads and heavy downpours all week long, Eng still managed a slight increase in step count, bumping it up from 4,572 to 4,890. How do you do that when you're feeling under the weather? By capitalizing on small, everyday movements. Things like getting back to gardening chores the second the weather cleared, or choosing to walk for quick grocery runs instead of just hopping in the car. Which leads us perfectly into Section 2, diet and daily mindfulness. Adjusting the intake. So you might have noticed the moving average weight on the previous slide crept up just a tiny bit to 69.41 kilograms. To combat this slight upward trend, which was caused by seasonal rains keeping them indoors, those shifting sleep schedules, and admittedly an uptick in junk food, Eng emphasizes a really strict dietary ratio. It's heavily focused on a 2-2-1 or 1-2-2 split. Basically, that means prioritizing 40% plants, 40% protein, and keeping carbs capped at 20%. The whole strategy leans on self-cooked meals. We're talking regular oatmeal, soft-boiled eggs, and throwing in some sardines 2 to 3 times a week for good measure. But here is where the adaptability really shines. Because of that shifting sleep schedule we just talked about, Eng made the very proactive decision to pause their 2-meal intermittent fasting regime. Instead, they adapted to a 3-meal structure, eating a heavy breakfast, a heavy lunch, and then finishing the day off with a light dinner. It's a perfect example of adjusting your systems on the fly when your lifestyle variables suddenly change. Now, to balance out that physical intake, Eng heavily prioritizes mental grounding. But listen to this. Rather than retreating to a mountaintop for hours in silence, Eng seamlessly weaves micromeditations into normal, daily chores. We're talking sitting meditations of just 1 to 3 minutes, quick walking meditations right after meals, and even practicing what's called mental noting while doing something as incredibly mundane as raking leaves in the yard. It really proves that a stoic, mindful mindset doesn't need to be an event. It can happen right alongside physical, everyday tasks.
Now that we've covered the body, let's pivot to the intellectual mind in Section 3, Navigating Coding and AI, the Intellectual Outlet.
In a world that is frankly obsessed with automation right now, Eng takes a very firm, very deliberate stance on the role of artificial intelligence in writing code. Eng views AI and large language models strictly as a mentor, basically a glorified search engine. The whole purpose of AI here is to upskill your own personal understanding rather than treating it like a replacement engine that does all the heavy lifting of human thought for you. The core warning here is the real danger of offloading your thinking to AI.
If you rely too heavily on these tools, Ang argues it will eventually lead to the de-skilling of your fundamental programming knowledge. You literally lose that deep learning that only comes from wrestling with a tough problem and taking your own personal notes. And perhaps most importantly, Ang warns that letting AI do all the work can actually cause your inherent enthusiasm and joy for programming to just fade away over the decades. It turns a passion into just another boring job.
Let's move on to Section 4, Programming Language Ecosystems, Tools of the Trade. Ang spends a good chunk of time exploring different languages, submitting pull requests, and just generally comparing paradigms. And when comparing two functional programming titans, Haskell and OCaml, Ang's notes are super insightful. Haskell wins big on beautiful syntax readability, assuming, of course, you avoid getting lost in overly complex alphabet soup. But OCaml? Ang notes it feels much more industrial and practical, largely because it has heavy corporate backing. In fact, Ang drops a pretty fascinating piece of trivia here. Did you know the original Rust compiler was actually written in OCaml? Pretty cool.
And that leads to what is arguably the most powerful takeaway for the tech world in this entire explainer. This is Ang's definitive message to all programming language creators out there. Keeping a core language minimal is great. And sure, language features absolutely matter. But official ecosystem support, that matters even more. A language simply cannot thrive without a robust, supportive ecosystem and solid standard libraries, especially for handling foundational requirements like command line tools. It literally cannot be an afterthought if you want the language to survive.
Finally, let's zoom back out for Section 5, Cultivating Hobbies and Home, Microjoys and Purpose. What's really amazing about Ang's week is the sheer variety of offline, totally hands-on pursuits. We're talking about aiming to declutter just one item per day with their significant other, priming specific Apistogramma cichlid fish pairs in their outdoor ponds, planning grout work on some tiles, and researching tech. From fish keeping to home repair, these tactile projects provide a much-needed sense of accomplishment that is entirely separate from the digital world of coding. It keeps things grounded. Speaking of researching tech, Ang ran into a highly relatable dilemma this week. Facing an outdated mobile operating system that was actually restricting features like XPAN resolution and macro photography, Ang had to decide where to allocate the technology budget. This poses the classic modern question for a lot of us. Is it worth fixing or replacing a broken DSLR right now? Or should those funds go toward a high-end mobile phone that supports those same photography needs? It's just a great, practical example of everyday resource management. And we're going to leave you with this final, rather stoic thought from Ang. Reflecting on all these hobbies and routines, Ang writes, "These activities provide a crucial outlet for learning, personal growth, and expression, adding purpose and satisfaction to our lives beyond our daily routines." It beautifully summarizes the anatomy of a really well-reviewed week. So I'll challenge you. Look at your own week and ask yourself, how intentionally are you tracking and cultivating the physical, intellectual, and joyful foundations of your own life? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.